Yo, what is up, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video. Today, I'm making a reaction video to the trade that just went down right around midnight here on the East Coast. Woj, as he typically does, drops a trade out of absolutely nowhere. The Los Angeles Lakers are getting Patrick Beverley from the Utah Jazz, who went there in the Gobert trade for Taylor Horton-Tucker and Stanley Johnson. No picks involved. That's the whole deal. So, let's break it down from both sides, starting off. Also, I know this isn't that big of a deal, but it's August. There's literally nothing happening in the NBA world. I'm struggling for content. Let me have this one. So, Patrick Beverley going to the Lakers, of course. It's a win for them. They immediately get a pretty good grade for this. Taylor Horton-Tucker, of course, giving him up and Stanley Johnson, two younger guys on the roster, but they needed a guy who could play defense. Pat Bev's a guy who has been an integral piece to multiple teams making the playoffs as of recently, last season, with the Minnesota Timberwolves kind of helping to change their culture a little bit, being a guy who's just a really hard-nosed defender. He's going to get in your face and show some fight, which is something the Lakers had like none of last season. They a lot of times just rolled over and kind of just gave up at points. Patrick Beverley is going to kind of help reverse some of that. He also, of course, brings defense, which they need, especially at the point of attack. They had really no guard defense last season. Pat Bev is going to give it 100%, give it his all on that side of the ball. He's going to knock down a couple shots. He doesn't make them contenders or anything. He doesn't revolutionize this team like some people might say he is. Some people, I guarantee there are going to be some Lakers fans that say like, oh my gosh, this completely changes things. And while he is a good addition, it doesn't change things. They still have to make more moves if they want to try and return to the realm of, contender, or they would need a lot of moves to become contenders again, but at least become a competent playoff team. There are still a lot of moves that have to be made, which maybe this is a precursor to some of those, but we'll get to that in a second. And of course, giving up Taylor Horton-Tucker and Stanley Johnson in this trade for the Utah Jazz, I think that's a decent return. Patrick Beverley isn't a guy you really want to keep on your roster anyways. He's past 30. You're trying to rebuild now around either Donovan Mitchell, or eventually you're probably going to trade him. So you're trying to start this new young core, and you do get a guy in Taylor Horton-Tucker who didn't play well for the Lakers. His stock really fell off over the course of these last few seasons. A couple seasons ago, he was looked at as their best trade chip, and now, he was kind of the main piece in a Patrick Beverley trade, which isn't saying much. So his stock has fallen quite a bit, but he does still have some interesting characteristics to his game. He's got a lot of length. He's still pretty young. He's shown potential as a defender, a slasher. He still can't shoot, but maybe, there's some time for him to kind of grow and learn in Utah. And now he's kind of just he doesn't have the weight of having to be an immediate contributor on a contending team, which is something that a lot of young players struggle with. It's hard to be on a team that has championship aspirations and you're called on in your second or third season to immediately make an impact. That really wasn't ever his game. So now in Utah, he's got no expectations. He can just go out there, do whatever he's got to do. I'm sure he can put up decent stats on a team that's probably going to be pretty bad and just kind of learn and explore his game. I think it's a win for him, getting to get this change of scenery. And then for Stanley Johnson, that loss kind of hurts for the Lakers. He was really solid for them last season at moments, brought a little bit of life and youth into them, and he still is pretty young. So the Utah Jazz picking up a guy in him who they can either just cut if they don't want him on the roster, or I would assume they keep him, just kind of see what he does have in the tank, getting to, be a piece of that burgeoning young core, I guess, in Utah, next to Taylor Horton-Tucker, of course, and whatever pieces they get for guys like Donovan Mitchell, Mike Conley. Of course, they've got Jared Vanderbilt on the roster, Walker Kessler. There are some pieces there, Nickeil Alexander-Walker as well. Some guys on the roster, they're not going to be a very good team next season after they trade Donovan, but they've got some decent young talent that they're building. They're at least trying to, put some young talent in place to see what they can do and figure out who's going into the next phase of their rebuild. So decent for them as well. I think they got a pretty good return for Pat Bev. Maybe they would have wanted a second or a first round pick, but getting a couple young guys, that's pretty good too. So that's pretty much all I have to say about the impact that this immediate trade is going to have. But beyond the trade, there's a lot more stuff that's interesting too, because of course, one of the main things that everyone noticed when this trade happened is now you have Patrick Beverley and Russell Westbrook on the same team. And for those of you that don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, which is ridiculous, it's been that long now, in the playoffs, Patrick Beverley dove for a loose ball, hit Russell Westbrook in the legs. Dirty play, not dirty play, you can decide for yourself. But he ended up putting Russell Westbrook out for the rest of the playoffs, costing the Thunder a potential chance, making a run for the finals when him and KD were still together. So they've had beef since then. Multiple times they've chatted at each other on the sidelines, chirped at each other, gotten in each other's faces. It is a very legitimate beef. Now, of course, the saying goes that winning cures all issues. Like, if they come in together and they're like, okay, we can make this work, then I don't see any reason it can't work. But the problem is, I don't know how much this Lakers team is going to win. And there's already been a lot of rumors about Russell Westbrook being moved. And now that Pat Bev comes into things, I don't know if they would have traded Taylor Horton-Tucker and Stanley Johnson for a guy who's going to be like your backup point guard. I don't see him and Russ starting next to each other. And so I think they kind of maybe envision Pat Bev as their starting point guard this upcoming season, precursoring a Russell Westbrook trade. Now, of course, the problem with that is Kyrie's off the table. You can't get Kyrie anymore because KD said, okay, I'm just going to stay with Brooklyn. Kyrie said, I'm cool to stay with Brooklyn too. They're going to stay there. So immediately there is no like big name point guard you can go out and get like a Kyrie Irving to bring into this team. So who do you trade Russ to? And that's where an interesting report comes from a Lakers reporter. I cannot remember his name. I'll try and flash the tweet up here if I remember to do so, but it came from a Lakers reporter in a late night Lakers space saying basically that if the Lakers are willing to include their 2029 first round pick to the Indiana Pacers, a trade's going to happen. Between Russell Westbrook going to Indiana, I would assume for like Buddy Hield, maybe Miles Turner. I don't really know who they're getting in that trade, but some form of, getting Buddy Hield, I would assume is a name that's involved in that, Miles Turner or whatever pieces coming over to the Los Angeles Lakers. And I think ultimately that makes them a better team. As much as I love Russ, after this Pat Bev trade, it feels like they're trying to work him out. It feels like he's not going to stay here for very long. And additionally, this clears up a roster space, which you would need with a 2-for-1 swap where you trade Russell Westbrook to the Pacers for two of their guys to kind of fill out the roster. And if they can fill out a roster of like Pat Bev, Buddy Hield, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and like a Miles Turner, that's a pretty solid team. Of course, you're still pretty weak on the bench. You don't have a lot of depth, but it is a pretty solid start. Then maybe you pick up some guys on the buyout market. You could sign like a Dennis Schroeder out of free agency. There's still some names out there on the market that can make a decent impact. So maybe you do something like that. Maybe you just, you've got Lonnie Walker, who I think can be a guy who can contribute off the bench, at least as a piece. So we'll see. You signed Thomas Bryant. Like, they've made a couple good moves here and there, but I still think there's more to be done after this Pat Bev trade. And to me, it really feels like Russell Westbrook is on the way out. I would be surprised if he's on the roster heading into the season after this trade. It seems like the Lakers really feel this sense of urgency to compete, especially after LeBron James signed that extension. And there's been a lot of rumors circulating that, and I personally think so too, that LeBron wouldn't have signed that extension if the Lakers didn't guarantee him they were going to do whatever they could to return to championship contention within the next year or so, whatever they have to do in this offseason. There's also been a lot of rumors that the Lakers have been saying to LeBron, we're not done making moves. I believe Rob Pelinka even said on some talk show that, we want to make more moves. We have more moves in mind. So I'm curious to see what this precurses, because I think that's what's really interesting. Pat Bev and Russell Westbrook, of course, is a really weird narrative and just one of those things that seems to happen in the NBA. Pat Bev on the Lakers himself, is an interesting piece too. How does he change the game for them? THT, what can he do in Utah? But really what I'm kind of focused on now is, what does this mean for Russell Westbrook, and what are we going to see the Lakers do next? Because I think a Russ trade is closer than we might anticipate. So those are my thoughts on this trade and what's going to come after it. I think Russell Westbrook, this trade to the Pacers could very realistically get done shortly if the Lakers are as willing to include those two picks as I think that they are. So maybe that's a trade that we see coming up pretty soon, which fingers crossed, because at this point, I just want news. Like I said at the beginning of the video, we haven't had much. So I appreciate you for sticking with me through all of this. Also, I dropped channel memberships for those of you that made it to the end of the video. If you want to support, you get like channel icons, free early access to videos, stuff like that. So go ahead and check that out if you do want to support. But otherwise, I appreciate y'all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy. I'll see y'all later. Real One, say it back.